Hi, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the difference between globalist-controlled propaganda media, the one that pumps out the narrative all the time, and independent media. Now, independent media, I'm usually talking about some sort of organisation with multiple employees, like Rebel News as a case in point, and there's some others, but there's also some quite big players in terms of subscriber numbers, like Tucker Carlson being a new one in that independent end of things, but Mark Dice and Dinesh D'Souza and so on. So there's many out there that are offering independent news sources. There's one that I often like that's used to do sort of short 5-minute or so videos on a certain guy called Ramsey Paul, and he was gone for a while. He's come back again, and he's recently started to do those. I don't know if he's doing them every day, but anyway, independent news sources. So comparing the two. Now, over the last few weeks, I've made a sort of just a little list, a casual list, because I wasn't looking at it all the time, but looking at how mainstream globalist controlled propaganda narrative media would present a story or cover an event, and how they would present it, and how independent media would present it. The same story, the same thing. Now, the globalist controlled media sticks totally to the narrative, so by definition, they're not going to be fair, balanced, or reasonable, present both sides, because their first sort of imperative is to stick to the narrative and only put into the story what the narrative allows them to. So there's a very big issue of narrative control there, which is effectively means they're scripted by Downtown Globalist Central, and this of course covers all the major media outlets across the Western world are controlled in that way. The independent media, of course, has no such narrative control, and so they can cover the same topic, the same story, but they can present both sides, and so you see completely different flavor on this. I mean, just one story I looked at half an hour or so ago was a story about the French riots. Now, the beginning point of the article was to present France and white people as being racist oppressors, and the black people weren't riot, or the Islamic people weren't rioting because they're just inclined to riot. They're not rioting because they've got such a massive chip on their shoulder, or they're freeloaders coming to France for the handouts. That's nothing to do with that. They're just fighting back against white supremacy and fascist Nazis, and they're completely justified. Whatever was done to them, these black people, was completely unjustified. And so it starts off with the unrest. So they don't call it riot. The unrest in France was is starting to abate after the killing of a teenager by a white police officer who has been held, who's been arrested for homicide. So they've straight away it's already Jamal or they're interviewing some guys, all anecdotal, that Jamal has said that he has been the victim, and he and the racist police from an early age, when police would come to the neighbourhood and viciously arbitrarily beat brown and black people, and the police were all white, and they were just arbitrary. And I was there, and he grabbed my older brother and threw him to the ground, and then did it like Hitler. And so this is supposed to be evidence, and the story goes on. Now, it's only a 400-word piece, but they managed 4 times to say that the teenager was shot. And it's a 17-year-old teenager living with his mother in one of the poorest areas of Paris. So he's brown, he's oppressed, he's living with his single mother, oppressed. He's in a poor area, oppressed, and then he's being shot at boy, evil white fascist Nazi police. So the inference is there's not no stage do they talk about anything. It's all evil white people oppressing black, brown people. That is the entire story. There is not at no stage do they talk about that this area of black, brown, North Africans is the highest. It's got the highest crime rate in France. There's no mention of that. There's no mention that most of these people carry guns or knives or weapons of some sort. There's no mention of the amount of assaults against police. There's no mention of the criminality of these people who are career criminals. There's no mention of any of those sorts of things. That is all airbrushed out of the story and is presented. I mean, if you didn't know anything about it, you'd come away thinking, well, those poor people being put upon by those evil white people, those neo-Nazis, those fucking white supremacists, Hitler. Yeah, I mean, you'd be forgiven, and that's how the article is expressed. The killing of the kid, even stopping him for the traffic thing was an act of evil white supremacist oppression. Even doing that, he was a great kid who did nothing wrong, who was about to become a rocket scientist. No, they didn't say that, but so that was the. Now, if you look at an independent media source, now they, as I would do it, I'd look at, okay, all right, then, well, there's clearly riots. Why, because someone gets shot, would you not take them out of court? There's gazillions of dollars and human rights lawyers and NGOs that'll flock to the court case to help and do it for free and organise compensation payouts. There'll be all sorts of things. So that the means to assuming there's something bad happened, something inappropriate occurred, your means to address this is very substantial. But why must there be riots all across France, which include looting and burning? You'd have some sort of sympathy, maybe, or sympathy. You maybe would have a better job of understanding it, say, if they directly attack police stations, say, and then you could make the direct relationship between they perceive the oppression of police, so they attack police stations. But instead, they're looting sports stores and handbag shops and things like that. So that's hardly a response to an injustice that they perceive may have occurred in an interaction with the police. Libraries were burned down. Thousands of cars were torched and burned. This seems to be senseless violence and mayhem. This is out of all proportion and bears no relationship, you'd think, to the issue. But this article and other articles argue that there's this miasma of oppression. So they're fighting back against Nazis. And because they're fighting back against Nazis, anything they do is permissible and acceptable and justifiable. Any action that the Nazis take to quell the violence is just more Nazism. That's all it is. But I'm looking at independent journalists covering it. I would more or less cover it and say, look, there's why are these people even in France in the first place? The idea they've been invited, many arrived illegally and then were allowed to stay. Other immigrants came as family reunion or something. There's very few people arrive because they wanted to be French or they wanted to integrate into French society. Far from it. They're there to take advantage of the handouts, and they've got, France has got one of the most generous welfare states in the world. So, and these people are given full benefits plus. They're given free housing. They're given all sorts of handouts, and in spite of this, they perceive themselves as victims. Now, a lot of the illegals that arrive in France go to these areas and then they hide amongst the people there and try and sort of disappear into the black brown population. So the police did frequently go along to look at papers, and so they could grab and deport illegals. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not explained in any of the globalist media articles. But it is covered in the independent media, so they point that out. And they point out that when the police attempt to make an arrest or a detention, detain somebody, that these North African black brown mobs suddenly appear and start stoning them and shooting at them or trying to stab them, and so they're understandably jittery when they go into these areas, and justifiably so. But that's not mentioned in the mainstream media. But then it would create a completely different view, and the amount of people that have been criminals in their own country, and the amount of countries that see an opportunity with mass migration to get rid of all their criminals, empty out their prisons, and send them to a first world country. It's your problem now, buddy. So these sort of things aren't mentioned. The propensity of these people to gather in mobs and throw, to not respect authority in any way, unless that authority is handing out freebies. But none of these things are mentioned. Why is it that so-and-so is third generation born in France and yet can barely speak French? Why is it that he hangs around in ghettos? Why is it that he doesn't want to integrate, doesn't want to be French? Why is it that so many of these people hate the French, hate all the French people, hate the French country, hate everything about France, but they're happy to take the giveaways and the freebies? These sorts of things. So it's far more nuanced than the globalists would have us believe, that it's these evil white supremacist Nazis and everything. That's a complete and total falsehood. But it's one that it's the narrative. White supremacist, Hitler! It's the global narrative that the globalists are pushing in order to crush all white countries and undermine them and break their confidence and just clear the way for the globalist project generally. Remember, white people are the only people in the world that want to share power of government. They want to share power with the elites. And that's developed over many centuries in white Western countries. There's no other place in the world where you get that same thing happening. And the globalists know it. And so they've got to get rid of white people or undermine them to a point where they're either irrelevant or they've no longer got the confidence to want to share power with the elites. But you don't get that in any other country. You get the tin pot dictator who wants to take over from the other tin pot dictator and hand out goodies to his buddies and his family members. You get that. You get that sort of the corrupt Eastern potentate type mentality. You get that. You also get people that want freebies from the trough. You get that. But to share power and responsibility of government, that is a uniquely white thing, and you just don't see it elsewhere. Certainly not that I've noticed in my very extensive years of international traveling. It was only in white countries where you'd see it. Not every white person, of course, but it's only in white, and it's those white people that are not part of the elite, but believe they have to share or should be allowed to share power and responsibility with the elite for the running of the country and deciding on policy. It's those people that the globalists most hate, and it's those people who they say, well, they're the white supremacists, they're Hitler. So looking at the coverage of just that's one example, and I'll go on. I could go on forever here, but there's just how they push the narrative at the expense of all else, at the expense of facts, at the expense of reality, and so on. So here's a bus crash, and it kills 12. Now, only one of the 12 children. This is school children here, middle high school from the looks of it. Only one of the children is non-white. That is the only child they mention. That is the only child pictured. The 11 white kids that died, hey, who the fuck cares? The real cry only for the black kid. That's the only thing you need to. That's the only takeaway from the story. So they push the death of the black. There's only one. There's 11 white kids died, but none of them are mentioned or featured. 3 men are arrested for murder, 2 black men and 1 white East European. Now, only the white European male is featured in the story with a picture, but it's not stated that he's an East European recent arrival, possibly illegal. Instead, it's put forward that evil white guy did the murder. The black people aren't mentioned, and 2 other accomplices. That's as far as it goes. Why isn't there a picture of one of the black guys? Why isn't it mentioned that the two guys? Instead, they make out as if 3 men committed the murder and they were all white. That's the inference. Prison escape, 9 men escape. 2 are white, the rest are brown and black. Only the white men are featured on the photograph, making out as if it's only white. You know, the black people, career criminals and dangerous, aren't mentioned. A school science prize is awarded. It's a senior high school. School science prize is awarded to a group of 6 kids, and there are 5 white males and 1 black female, who's clearly the affirmative action addition there. I don't think she'd have added anything to it from the looks of it. So this school science prize, the media covers it, but there's only her picture. And the inference is that she personally did all the work while the evil fascist Nazi white males just stood around, did nothing, and exploited her or something, when, you know, the opposite would have been the case. But again, they only report that they make out as if it's the, you know, the black chick did all the work and is the only one, and it was the intellectual genius of the group, when clearly there was nothing close to reality in that. So here's a big city in the US. 92 people are assaulted in this Democrat sort of, you know, Chicago, Baltimore type city. Only one of the people committing assault is white, and but that's the only person named and featured with a photograph. You know, the 91 black people who did not. 11 rapes occur, or attempted rapes, I think this is, and there's no white people involved. It's all black, brown people doing the raping here, and primarily raping white girls, by the way. And so there's a picture of a white rapist, but this is from like a year previous. So the inference is that all these rapes are committed by white men, when in fact it's not. There's no white men involved in any of that. So there's a lot of Americans that are detained overseas by, you know, international police, as in Native Americans, not naturalized Americans. And I've only been able to find one major news story, and that's the one was arrested was a black lesbian, and so that gets international headlines. All the straight white males that are being arrested, nothing. So here's a story about people below the poverty line, and the only featured stories or featured, you know, anecdotal sort of coverage is black single mothers having multiple children or having, you know, many children to multiple different partners. I mean, again, you could go on. There's this very you know, and we've seen other ones. Now there's a coverage, for example, of an exclusive ski resort, and other than some, you know, there's a few what look like Arabic people, like sons of Arabic oil sheikhs, and there's a few black people who are the offspring of African, you know, wealthy African diplomats and you know, corrupt generals and so on. But everyone else is white, and so that this is waved around as white supremacy. Now it's a white country in a you know, a sport or leisure undertaking that's primarily, you know, white, you know, conceived and developed and so on by whites. So you'd expect to see majority white people in a white country, you know, and so on. But instead they flip that and say, no, the fact there's so many white people here means it's white supremacy, Nazi fascist Hitler. And so there's that same sort of adherence to the narrative. Now, pretty much everything that happens is done, you know, to the narrative. Now, if you look at the independent coverage of these stories, it presents both sides, and it just mentions casually there was 100 people were assaulted, but 98 of them were by black people. Now, there's other things here I've looked at that where hundreds of people over any given weekend are shot or shot at and injured by firearms on any given weekend. And nearly all of these, with rare exception, are black people shooting each other. But you don't see that in the news. It's not covered. Yet if one black person is shot by a white person, regardless of the reasons, regardless of the provocations, then that's an international headline. Why isn't there a headline when the blacks are shooting each other? Why isn't a headline when the black person shoots the white person? Even the independent news doesn't cover this in any degree. And you do need to be a bit careful, because the social media platforms are very keen to shut you down if you try and make too much of this. So having a look at all this, then you see that there's a vast difference with how the globalist controlled media covers things. And any atrocity alleged or otherwise by the Russian forces in that war going on there, that's international headlines. Any atrocity by the Ukrainians is ignored. This sort of thing. So very selective picking of the thing. But just looking at how the globalist controlled media covers things, there's nothing reliable about it. I don't think they're capable of reporting anymore. Their fanatical adherence to the anti-white narrative is such that they're blinded to any sort of independent or impartial news reporting. They just can't do it. I suspect because they're not allowed to, and ideologically they're predisposed towards not doing it. But it means that it's not the globalist controlled legacy media. They're just not worth pissing on. Really, they're that bad. They're that bad. And independent media is really the only hope that any of us have got to understanding what's really going on in the world. You've been a Tacitus today. You're a Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.